Clara Montrose had been adored her entire life. Or at least that's what she was told. Adored by distant relatives who never failed to smile too brightly at family gatherings. Adored by high society friends, who couldn't remember her favorite color but could list every stock company her father controlled. Adored by men with polished shoes and rehearsed compliments who lingered more on her father's bank accounts than on her laughter. "Everyone loves you, Clara," her mother would remark at banquets as if reminding her of the obvious. And Clara, in her sequin gowns and sparkling jewels, would smile, bow her head, and feel the hollow echo inside. "But who actually knows me?" The Montrose family was old wealth, the kind that didn't just drip from investments but cascaded from generations. Clara's father controlled shipping across 3 continents. Their names sat etched on university walls and hospital wings. She was 23, graceful, educated, already tailed by paparazzi more interested in her designer seasons than her opinions. To the world, she was untouchable, the golden daughter in a gilded cage. But beneath satin and crystal was something far less polished. Clara was desperately lonely. It wasn't that she lacked company, her days overflowed with it. Drivers, tutors, advisors, stylists, suitors. Yet company is not the same as companionship. Every conversation seemed rehearsed. Every smile calculated. Every compliment scripted. People admired Clara the heiress, Clara the symbol, Clara the opportunity. But Clara the person? That girl never made it into conversation. The final straw fell at her most recent birthday gala. Her father rented the Grand Palais ballroom, chandeliers dripping like galaxies. Guests spilled champagne while a 4-tier cake dazzled with edible gold. As Clara walked through the crowd, strangers wished her joy, men lined up with floral arrangements and women buzzed about couture. Yet, when the song ended and Clara politely slipped away, she overheard 2 guests whispering near the balcony. "She's beautiful, yes," one smirked, "but more importantly, imagine inheriting all that Montrose wealth. Whoever marries her marries a kingdom." The word stung sharper than knives. Clara's chest hollowed. It wasn't even jealousy or cruelty. It was casual, offhand, as though wealth was her only worth. That night she lay awake, staring at her ceiling of painted constellations, wondering if a single person had ever wanted her, purely her, unvarnished and bare. She whispered to herself, "Would anyone love me if I had nothing?" The question wouldn't leave. Clara's friend Julia, one of the rare people she trusted, planted the seed that changed everything. Julia had grown up normal, without mansions or drivers, and she often teased Clara for her out-of-touch habits. "You've never even carried groceries, have you?" Julia once laughed over coffee. Clara had smiled faintly but thought about it later. No, she had not. She had never known that kind of life. She'd never been seen without her frame of wealth. And without that, who was she? The idea bloomed. What if I disappeared into simplicity? Pretended to strip everything just for a while? See who actually notices me, not the Montrose fortune but the Montrose girl? It wasn't practicality that hooked her. It was hunger. Hunger for something real. Hunger for sincerity. Hunger for someone to look at her and not see dollar signs. The plan pulled together slowly, half mad, half brilliant. Clara dug through her wardrobe for plain clothes, laughing bitterly at how her simplest dress still screamed designer. She went shopping unnoticed for the first time in years, entering a discount store where fluorescent lights hummed. There she bought faded jeans and t-shirts that smelled faintly of cardboard. She stared at her reflection afterward, hair tied in a simple knot, face stripped of makeup, and blinked in dizzy awe. She looked like a stranger, ordinary, almost invisible. The disguise felt terrifying, but freeing. Through Julia's cousin, Clara arranged to rent a modest room above a flower shop in a neighborhood far from marble mansions. It wasn't glamorous, peeling wallpaper, pipes that groaned, a window that rattled with every bus that passed below. But when Clara placed her bag on the wobbly bed frame, she smiled, the first real smile in weeks. Here no one knew her last name. No one bowed, no one whispered heiress. She was only Clara. Of course her parents knew nothing. Clara told her father she was studying abroad for a writing program, a story he barely glanced at before returning to quarterly reports. Her mother frowned at the oddity but assumed Clara was simply experimenting. Neither suspected the truth, that their daughter had traded palaces for plaster just to chase an answer. Clara's first genuine challenge was work. Her life had never demanded she earn her own wage. But Julia's cousin, who ran a small bookstore, agreed to hire her part-time to shelve novels and handle the front desk. "You'll start at minimum wage," he had warned. "I wouldn't know what else to expect," Clara replied, steady, though inside her chest jittered. Money was meaningless to her. In theory, she could walk out and buy the bookstore 10 times over. But that wasn't the point. She wanted to know what life felt like without wealth cushioning every step. And so her disguise began. Shoes too thin for streets, hair frizzing without stylists, hands clumsy with registers. She fumbled. She blushed. Customers sometimes glanced at her oddly, this girl who seemed educated yet oddly naive. But each awkward moment stitched itself into her experiment. This, Clara would remind herself, tired and sore at night, this is what real living feels like. For the first time, Clara wasn't orbiting a spotlight. She was one of countless faces blending into the city's anonymity. And though it scared her, she loved it. More than anything, she waited for an answer. Would anyone in this new life look at her, not her inheritance, as something worth admiring, respecting, even loving? And though she didn't know it yet, that answer would not come from polished shoes or glittering chandeliers. It would come from a stranger named Ethan, with sleeves rolled above rough arms, eyes shadowed by struggle, and a heart that had no time for games. Their first meeting would be anything but smooth. But it would spark the very truth Clara ached for. And so, the heiress disguised herself as ordinary, without yet realizing that the very act of stripping off her gold would soon uncover everything that mattered. Clara had expected freedom to feel like flight. Instead, her first week of living as ordinary Clara felt more like falling with style. Her rented room above the flower shop creaked constantly, pipes clanged as though arguing with themselves, and her bed springs squealed like untrained violins when she shifted a little too suddenly. At night, she curled beneath a thin blanket listening to buses rattle her window and thought, so this is what silence here sounds like, busy instead of hollow. At the Montrose estate, silence meant suffocation under chandeliers. Here, silence felt alive, carried on footsteps and traffic and mysterious clinks through thin walls. The first shock came in the morning when she attempted to make coffee. Clara had never touched a drip coffee machine in her life. The estate staff handled all such tasks. She stared at the dusty machine Julia had lent her. Instructions online told her it was simple. Water, filter, grounds. But Clara poured too much water, forgot the filter, and ended up with a tidal wave of brown sludge that flooded onto the counter and dyed her sleeve. She nearly burst into tears before she remembered her goal. To live, not flawlessly but authentically. "Authenticity's messy," she muttered to herself while scrubbing furiously with paper towels. Julia dropped by later, laughing at the mess, and offered Clara her first blunt piece of survival advice. Learn 2 skills fast, brewing coffee and learning bus routes. Without those, you're toast. Clara chose to practice both, though the bus system became another battlefield. At the Montrose estate, sleek drivers whisked her silently in town cars wherever she needed. Now she climbed trembling onto buses where drivers barely glanced at her, odor of diesel filling her nose, strangers brushing shoulders without polite apologies. She missed stops, got scolded for fumbling bills instead of swiping cards, and once ended up 15 blocks off course, nearly in tears again. Yet when she finally sat in the right seat, swaying with the crowd, she felt strangely proud. "I did this. I got here by myself." The bookstore was her greatest challenge yet. Julia's cousin Marco had little patience for princesses. Not that he suspected she was one, but Clara's clumsy hands and constant over-politeness grated on him anyway. "This isn't a palace," he grunted the first morning. "Customers want books. You'll shelve these, learn the register, and stop apologizing every 2 seconds." "Yes, sir," Clara replied automatically, forcing her chin high though her cheeks burned. Her first shift was chaos. She stacked books out of order, placed mystery novels beside cookbooks, and nearly fainted when the register demanded she calculate change. A young boy, impatient for his comic, tapped his foot dramatically until Marco swooped in to save the sale. Clara mumbled apologies again and again, which only earned Marco's glare. By evening, her back ached, her hair frizzed into stubborn curls, and her palms stung with paper cuts. She returned to her flower shop room, collapsed onto the squeaky bed springs, and felt both miserable and alive. Because in her misery she realized nobody had once treated her as royalty, or anything more than an ordinary coworker fumbling her way forward. And wasn't that the point? Still, Clara found herself slipping in ways she hadn't anticipated. The habit of privilege shadowed her even when stripped bare. One morning, she nearly snapped at a bus driver when he closed the door before she boarded, then caught herself, cheeks blazing at her reflex. Another day, she tipped a street vendor far too generously, only realizing afterward that part of her disguise meant budgeting like ordinary people did. Julia reminded her sternly, "You'll blow your cover in a heartbeat if you keep tossing money like confetti. Real broke girls ration fries." Clara forced herself to adapt. She scribbled budgets on notepads, clipped bus passes to her jeans pocket, and set an alarm to remind herself. No more silk responses in a cotton world. And slowly it began to settle. By the third week, she could brew coffee without catastrophe, navigate bus lines without tears, and operate the register without incident. She was clumsy still, but less obviously foreign. And with each small victory, her disguise grew sturdier. Not a performance, but a lifestyle she started genuinely inhabiting. There were humbling moments that stitched themselves into her like threads of a new identity. One evening on her way home, rain cracked open the sky. Her flimsy hoodie clung to her, jeans heavy with water. She ducked beneath the awning of a corner store, shivering. Normally she would have called her driver or stepped into a chauffeured car. Tonight she stood alone in the downpour, watching ordinary people laugh, run, and curse as they splashed through puddles. She felt soaked, freezing but oddly free. Water ran across her cheeks and she lifted her face into it, laughing aloud, startling even herself. Another day, a little girl in the bookstore handed Clara a crayon drawing of a castle with stick figures smiling. "This is you," the child chirped proudly. Clara stared at the paper, throat aching. A castle drawn for the girl pretending to have no castle. What irony, and what odd kindness from a stranger who didn't care what Clara wore or owned. But as Clara settled deeper into her disguise, she began to sense that authenticity, while freeing, doesn't always come gently. Ordinary life pressed heavy too. The budget that left her nervous when groceries stretched too far. Nights spent rubbing her sore feet. Sleepless hours where she asked herself again, if someone fell in love with me like this, would I know it's real? The mirror reflected a different Clara now. Hair loose around her shoulders, under-eye shadows from real labor, fingertips nicked from cardboard and paper. Less polished, less radiant, but more alive. And somewhere in the crowd of this new life was supposed to be the answer. Someone who could see this Clara, unvarnished, unsponsored. She hadn't met him yet. But she would soon, and when she did, it wouldn't be silk and chandeliers that crashed together. It would be faded jeans, late evenings, and raw edges. Their first collision, messy and sharp, was waiting just around the corner. Clara lay in bed that night staring at the rattling window. Buses rumbled like thunder. She no longer whispered to herself the question, would anyone love me if I had nothing? Instead, she whispered, when it happens, I'll know it's true. That whisper steadied her. This life, messy as it was, had already given her more authenticity than decades in a palace. She closed her eyes, unaware that tomorrow in the bookstore, between spilled coffee and misplaced novels, her question would finally begin to find its answer. Because tomorrow Ethan would walk in. Not as a savior, not as a prince. Just as himself. And everything would begin. The bookstore smelled faintly of paper and dust, with undertones of burnt coffee drifting from the tiny machine Marco insisted made good enough swill. Clara had gotten better at her shifts, no longer fumbling quite so disastrously with the register, shelving with a system that was at least recognizably patterned, and learning to keep her apologies confined to no more than 3 per transaction. It was Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell jingled and in walked the man who would upend her test of love, though at first he appeared only as another weary customer. He looked ordinary. Jeans frayed at the cuffs, boots scuffed, a flannel shirt rolled to his elbows. His hair fell into his face messily, dark from sweat. His arms strong, though not in the manicured way of gym vanity. He carried himself like someone accustomed to work that pressed his shoulders daily. Perhaps construction, perhaps deliveries, but not boardrooms, not silk. Clara, organizing a stack of paperbacks, barely glanced up until Marco muttered behind the counter, "Great." Him again. Curiosity tugged. The man strode in directly, frustration stitched across his jaw. He carried a slip of paper, crumpled nearly to breaking. I ordered 3 books last month. Still nothing. You plan to deliver, or is this place just for decoration? His voice was deep, steady, but worn with impatience. Marco opened his mouth to retort, but Clara stepped forward without thinking. Excuse me, she said softly. What titles? The man blinked as though surprised Marco's assistant would bother. He handed her the paper, brows raised. 2 manuals on auto repair, 1 history of shipbuilding. It's been weeks. Clara skimmed the list. Something about his straightforwardness stirred something in her. It wasn't said with arrogance, only blunt honesty. I'll check the back for you. She hurried behind the stockroom door, rifling. Sure enough, there sat a small box marked with his order, forgotten in Marco's cluttered system. She sighed, shaking her head affectionately despite herself. He deserved these books. Returning, she set the stack in front of him, brushing dust away. Apologies. Found them. The man studied her, eyes sharp. And you are? Clara, she said simply. She stopped herself just short of adding her surname, old instincts almost betraying her disguise. Well, Clara, he said slowly, thank you for doing what your boss couldn't. Marco grumbled from behind the counter. Clara smiled faintly, sliding the receipt toward him. That'll be 43 even. He frowned, pulling crumpled bills from his wallet, worn, soft at the edges. He counted carefully. Clara watched, not because she pitied, but because his hands fascinated her. Hands lived in, scarred lightly, nails clean but rough. His fingertips told more truth than all the tailored hands she'd shaken in ballrooms. When he looked up, catching her eyes drifting, she flushed and busied herself with the bag. He lifted his eyebrows. Something funny? No, Clara said quickly. Just nothing. For a breath they locked gazes, hers embarrassed, his probing. Something flickered there, something she couldn't name yet, not attraction but recognition of sorts. You're different. And then the moment broke. He grabbed the bag, tucked the strap over his shoulder, muttered, "Try not to lose orders next time," and turned toward the door. The bell jingled goodbye. Clara exhaled. Later, Marco grunted her direction. Don't waste kindness on him. Why? He's Ethan, Marco said as though that explained all. At her blank look, he elaborated. Delivery guy. Rough life. Always complains. Pays in cash or not at all. Stubborn type. Clara frowned. He only wanted what he paid for. Marco snorted. And you want to play saint? Fine. But don't get ideas. He doesn't care about pleasantries. Clara tucked the name away. Ethan. It sat oddly gentle on her tongue. The next time Ethan came, he didn't storm. He arrived quietly, arms loaded with packages he dropped by the counter. Delivery for Marco, he said flatly. Claire was on duty again, brushing dust from bookshelves. She saw him out of the corner of her eye before hearing him, instinctively smoothing her shirt. He noticed her, and a faint crease bent his brow. You still here? Yes, Clara answered brightly. Part-time. He grunted something like acknowledgement and turned to leave. Clara, impulsive, blurted, How are the books? He paused at the door, shot her a sharp look. Something in her tone, perhaps too curious, too genuine, unsettled him. Good, he said finally. Actually useful. His voice softened slightly as if surprised by his own civility. Clara smiled before she could restrain it. He caught the smile and for half a second his eyes wavered, not ice, not fire, but reluctant warmth. Then he tugged open the door and disappeared again. These first encounters became a quiet rhythm. Ethan storming or delivering, Clara answering with steady patience. Each time, their bristling softened by inches. Marco rolled his eyes whenever Clara dared engage him. He's not worth it, Marco muttered again and again. But Clara wasn't engaging him for worth. Somewhere beneath Ethan's sharpness she sensed truth, not rehearsed charm, not strategies. Just blunt edges that could cut but didn't deceive. And part of her, though she wouldn't admit it, thrilled at the idea that this man couldn't care less about her name, her father, or her empire. He didn't even look at her twice except to check if she was genuine. Which, of course, was exactly the kind of test she was running. The turning point came when she nearly smashed a stack of mugs by accident, carrying them into the store as Marco barked at her to hurry. One slipped. Porcelain shattered at her feet. Clara startled backward, cheeks burning. Customers sighed impatiently. Marco muttered, hopeless. Ethan, standing by the counter with a package, said nothing for a long beat. Then he crouched, quietly gathering shards himself. Clara blinked as rough hands lifted porcelain beside her trembling ones. "You'll cut yourself if you're not careful," he said softly, almost muttering. His tone lacked scorn, it was practical, steady. Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, then really looked, eyes searching, worn eyes, suspicious but not cruel. "Why do you say that so much?" She froze. He set a shard down. "Sorry for mistakes, sorry for existing, sorry for what? Stop apologizing all the time. Just learn." And with that he left, bag over his shoulder, doorbell jingling again. Clara knelt among porcelain pieces long after, heart pounding wildly. No silk-tongued suitor had ever spoken to her like that, without deference, without false sweetness, just blunt honesty. It stung. It also echoed truer than anything she'd heard in months. That night, in her flower shop room, Clara whispered Ethan's words aloud. "Stop apologizing. Just learn." She didn't know whether to be angry, grateful, or both. But she knew one thing. Her story's disguise had finally collided with someone too real to be fooled. And perhaps, just perhaps, that meant her experiment was working. For weeks, Clara replayed Ethan's words in her head. Stop apologizing. Just learn. It irritated her, resonated with her, and forced her into reflection she hadn't dared before. In the Montrose mansion, apologies had been currency. Executives apologizing excessively, sycophants apologizing for not pleasing her father, guests apologizing when they forgot her name mid-toast. Even Clara herself had apologized constantly, as though apologizing buffered emptiness. But Ethan hadn't said it with cruelty. He had said it as though he expected more of her. That expectation surprised her. And it tethered her to him, no matter how she warned herself not to get attached. Their interactions became less rare as the days stretched on. Ethan delivered to the bookstore sometimes, his arms stacked with boxes Marco barely thanked him for. Clara noticed his glance through the glass door each time, the suspicion still there but curiosity flickering too. One rainy Tuesday, Clara emerged from the back room carrying a load of second-hand novels. Ethan stood dripping at the counter with soggy packages and muttered, "Rain ruins everything." His flannel clung to him uncomfortably. Impulsively, Clara disappeared to the kitchenette and returned with a towel she had kept in her locker for similar disasters of her own. She offered it silently. He blinked, startled, then frowned suspiciously. "Why?" "Because you'll catch cold," she said simply. He accepted reluctantly, muttering something about owing her. She smiled. Later, when he left, she found the towel neatly folded at the counter. It smelled faintly now of rain and him. The gesture was small. But bonds are built on smallness before anything grand. Clara began discovering Ethan beyond his brusque exterior. He read voraciously for one thing. It surprised her, the delivery man who carried manuals and histories leaving with arms full of dusty philosophy texts. He'd linger in corners flipping pages as if hungry for quieter worlds. "Why that one?" she asked once, noticing the thick novel under his arm. "Because it's impossible," he grunted. She frowned. "Impossible?" "To read," he clarified, expression tight but amused as though amused at himself. "And sometimes impossible things are worth proving wrong." The answer lingered with her. Clara began watching not only what he said but how his mind worked around life. Practical, sharp, unwilling to waste. And though he rarely smiled, the one time she caught it, a crooked, reluctant smirk when Marco accidentally tipped coffee onto his own shoes, her chest warmed like sunlight cutting fog. Ethan, for his part, remained wary. Something about Clara struck him as unusual. She carried herself too straight, too carefully for someone who claimed to be plain. She spoke with words that felt just a little too measured, too finely chosen. He couldn't place it, but he sensed there was more to her story than she let on. That unease kept him sharp. Yet, despite suspicion, he found himself noticing more. The way she held her breath while shelving heavy boxes, as though quietly proud at managing weight she wasn't built for. The faint curve of her mouth when a child left smiling with a picture book. The stubborn light in her eyes when Marco dismissed her mistakes, as though she was determined to endure regardless. He scolded himself silently. "Not your world, Ethan," he muttered at night. "Don't catch feelings for puzzles." And still, he returned on time, carried deliveries himself instead of passing them off, lingered too long near the counter. One Saturday afternoon, the tension between them cracked open. The bookstore was empty save for Clara, humming absent-mindedly as she reorganized shelves. Ethan, off shift, had wandered in, claiming he came for a title on architecture, though Marco smirked knowingly from the stockroom. Clara noticed him hovering between aisles, eventually leaning on a ladder beside her. "You work too much," Ethan said abruptly. Clara blinked. "Says the man who makes deliveries at all hours." "Touché." A faint tug of a smile ghosted his lips. "Doesn't mean I'm wrong. You look dead on your feet." "I'm learning," she said softly. "And apparently apologies won't cover mistakes, so I keep working until I don't need them." His eyes flickered, recognition of his own words used back on him. "And you believe that? That hard work's enough." Clara bit her lip. "I want to believe. Isn't it?" For a long moment he studied her, expression unreadable. Then unexpectedly he spoke with quiet conviction. "Sometimes. And sometimes, no matter how hard you work, people still shut doors in your face. That's why you don't rely on them opening, you build your own." His words landed like thunder in her chest. Insight, honesty, pain disguised in philosophy. Clara felt herself staring too long, absorbing not just the statement but the man carrying it. The silence stretched. Clara whispered, "That's brilliant." He shook his head sharply, retreating into gruffness. "It's survival, not brilliance." But Clara smiled with warmth she couldn't disguise. "Still sounds brilliant to me." He looked away, but she swore she saw the edge of his mouth twitch in reluctant amusement. From that day things shifted. They still teased sharply, still clashed in blunt and soft ways, but an understanding settled like unfinished music waiting for the next note. Clara brought Ethan leftover pastries from the cafe down the street. "To stop you from living on black coffee," she insisted. He rolled his eyes each time but never refused. Ethan once fixed the squeaky hinge on her locker without asking. She noticed days later and whispered gratitude he brushed off. They weren't friends, not fully. They weren't lovers, not yet. But the space between strangers and something grew narrower each passing week. One evening as the shop closed, a sudden power outage plunged the street into darkness. Clara fumbled behind the register, heart racing. Ethan, who had come late to collect a book order, instinctively lit his phone flashlight. He guided her gently by the elbow to avoid stacks and quietly said, "Don't panic, it's just the grid." Her pulse steadied under his assurance. When light returned 10 minutes later, Clara realized her hand lingered far too long against his arm. She coughed, flustered. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. For once, though, neither looked angry. There was only silence, heavy, electric. Clara lay awake that night staring at ceiling shadows. She had succeeded in immersing herself into a life stripped of silk. Yet her mission, the test of love, suddenly felt less like an experiment and more like danger. Because each glance, each banter answer, pulled her fragile disguise tighter around her heart. Ethan's suspicions lurked, and truth remained hidden between them like a live wire. But the growth of their bond was undeniable now. She had wanted to see who truly loved her. Yet the more she grew closer to him, the more frightened she became of what would happen when her truth unraveled. Still, one certainty burned clearer each day: her heart was no longer hers alone. And for better or worse, it belonged to Ethan. For all her efforts to vanish into an ordinary life, Clara Montrose could never fully escape her father's world. It pulled at her like gravity, tugging her back regardless of how far she ran. While she folded jeans into dresser drawers above the flower shop, reporters still speculated on her next public appearance. While she fumbled with bus passes, suitors filled her family's estate with flowers and speeches, eager to fasten themselves to her last name. Darling, Gregory Darnell called again. Her mother mentioned one afternoon over a video call Clara had agreed to answer out of guilt. The camera revealed her mother reclining elegantly in silk, pearls framed against flawless skin. "You really must stop ignoring him. The Darnells are respectable and Gregory is very determined. He says he's fond of you." Clara, wearing a t-shirt flecked with dust from the bookstore, smiled politely and lied, "Tell him I'm focused on my program right now." Her mother sighed, exasperated but resigned. "You can't hide from society forever, Clara. You'll need a partner worthy of your name." Clara muted the call afterward, staring at the cracked paint above her bed. They want a partner worthy of my name, not my heart. She curled her arms tighter around herself until the ache receded. Ethan's face, impatient but sincere, rose unbidden in her mind. The contrast sharpened with each visit back to the mansion. Clara kept these rare and brief, fearing her disguise would slip if she lingered too long. Still, her father often demanded her presence at dinners where powerful men circled like hawks. One evening, Clara arrived in a simple black dress, understated compared to the shimmering gowns of other women. She slipped into her seat, already tense as introductions began. Gregory Darnell sat across, flashing a smile polished by too many mirrors. "Clara," he began smoothly, "I've been reading about eco-shipping initiatives your father is pioneering. Incredible work. When we unite our families, imagine the networks we'll build." Clara forced her lips into a curve. "And do you imagine me in those networks, Gregory? Or only my father?" He laughed, too loudly. "Why not both? You represent the grace. He represents the empire. A perfect balance. Perfect balance." As though she were decoration next to a ledger. Clara's smile thinned. She excused herself later, breathing quick against the marble hallway. Each time she returned to this world, it suffocated faster. In her ordinary life, by contrast, Ethan asked nothing of her but reality. He teased her about her clumsiness, scolded her for over-apologizing, pressed her gently to grow sharper. Not once had he asked what school she came from or what family she belonged to. He cared how she stacked books, how she listened to customers, how she handled herself when tired. And though his suspicion lingered, his attention was unvarnished. The difference cut deep. Suitors pitched wealth. Ethan lived honesty. Maurice Montrose grew impatient with her refusals. "She cannot keep twirling about without direction," he barked one Sunday brunch, glass of wine trembling in his hand. "If she won't choose Gregory, I'll arrange dinners with others. The Hallstroms, the Whitakers, they all want her hand. Every one of them understands the value she brings." "The value," Clara repeated quietly, too low for her father to notice. She left the table soon after, fury boiling beneath her skin as the phrase repeated. The value she brings. To them her value was financial. Not her spirit, not her laughter, not her dreams. Only numbers. That evening, Clara returned to her rented room with a renewed clarity. She couldn't linger in two worlds forever. Yet leaving the Montrose world meant losing its protections, its illusions of safety. The thought terrified her. But Ethan's smirk flickered again in memory, and suddenly losing Marble didn't seem like loss at all. Of course, Ethan remained ignorant of the world she hid. To him, Clara was sweet, clumsy, ordinary. And he wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or intrigued by her growing persistence to insert herself into his routines. One Friday he caught her outside the bookstore holding a paper bag. "What's that?" he asked, suspicious. "Dinner," she admitted, thrusting it toward him. "You never eat well. Pastries are not food." His eyes narrowed. "What makes you think you can fix my life?" Clara winced but held firm. "I'm not fixing it. Just sharing mine." They sat on the back steps eating takeout noodles. Ethan ate cautiously, watching her as though waiting for a reveal. But when she slurped a noodle with an ungraceful laugh, he couldn't hold back a reluctant smile. That smile made her chest warm in a way no banquet ever had. Still, shadows of suitors followed her. Her phone buzzed incessantly with invitations from Gregory and others. She ignored most, but one she accidentally answered, an event invite Gregory had cornered her into with her parents' urging. He draped wealth around her in conversation, boasting yachts and private jets, bragging about the lavish honeymoon they could arrange. Clara's face stiffened across the table. "What if I don't want lavish?" she asked. Gregory blinked as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "Every woman dreams of it." "Not this one," she whispered, low but fierce. When she returned to her small room, she kicked off jeweled heels in disgust and swore never again. Her heart wanted streetlight dinners, laughter on back steps, brusque honesty that carried no bribery. Her heart wanted Ethan. But Ethan grew wary of her in ways Gregory never did. He didn't pursue her with wealth, but he resisted closeness with walls of suspicion. "You're strange, Clara," he told her one evening after they'd shelved books side by side. "You're too polished to be here but too stubborn to leave. Who are you really?" The question nearly froze her disguise. Her heartbeat hammered violently, but she disguised her panic with humor. Just a girl learning coffee machines. He narrowed his eyes, unconvinced, but let it go. Still, Clara lay awake that night realizing her secret had become dangerous. Because while other suitors desired her wealth, Ethan desired truth. If she couldn't give him that, could she ever win what she truly longed for from him? Clara's test was becoming her trap. Two worlds squeezed tighter with each passing day, the glass world of suitors pressing her into arranged futures, and the cardboard world with Ethan, dangerous in gentleness but demanding honesty. The more she longed for him, the more terrified she grew that the revelation of her real name and fortune would burn it all down. She whispered into her pillow one night, "Please, let him love me before he knows." But even as the words fell, she knew, love cannot survive long in lies. And the lies were piling fast. The more time Clara and Ethan spent circling one another, the harder it became to pretend it was merely coincidence. Their conversations lingered longer. Their silences grew charged. Their laughter, rare from Ethan, unrestrained from Clara, echoed strangely loud in the quiet aisles of the bookstore. Yet alongside the warmth, a taut thread of tension pulled tight. Clara's disguise was meant to protect her, to test the purest form of affection. But the closer Ethan leaned, the crueler it felt to keep walls rising between them. It began one Wednesday evening when they closed the bookstore together. Marco had asked Clara to finish stacking remainders, leaving Ethan at the counter while waiting for his latest delivery signature. "Careful," Ethan drawled, watching Clara wobble precariously on a stool. "You'll break your neck for novels nobody reads." Clara rolled her eyes. "Not everything has to carry world-changing consequence." "Everything does," he countered, voice quieter. "Even the way you climb ladders." She frowned, scanning him. "That's a very strange thing to say." Ethan smirked faintly. "Then stop tempting gravity." The banter should have ended there, but their eyes lingered longer than intended. Clara felt heat prickle across her cheeks. She climbed carefully down and for a moment, standing close enough to feel the brush of his shoulder, she imagined leaning against him. Instead, she laughed nervously and said, "See? Still alive." But the thought lingered long after the lights turned off. 2 days later, Clara brought Ethan an old leather-bound notebook. "You're always stuffed full of lines of wisdom," she teased lightly, placing it in his hands. "Now write them down before we forget them all." His jaw set. "Why would you give me this?" "Because your words matter," she said firmly. "Even if you pretend they don't." Ethan stared at the notebook for a long moment, clearly wrestling. Finally, he placed it in his bag wordlessly. Yet hours later, Clara saw him scribbling by the pier when he thought nobody noticed. It made her smile until her chest hurt. But storms weren't slow to form. Ethan's suspicion hardened whenever Clara's edges slipped. One afternoon, she startled when Gregory Darnell appeared out of nowhere in the bookstore, charming one of the cashiers while pretending to browse. Clara froze in panic. Ethan, shelving nearby, noticed her face pale. "You know him?" Ethan asked afterward, gaze sharpened. "And no," Clara stammered too quickly. Ethan's eyes narrowed, lips pressed together. He didn't argue, but distance hung between them afterward. Sharper silences, clipped responses. Clara hated herself for the dishonesty. That night she whispered into her pillow, "Just a little longer. If he falls for me now, it's real. Then I'll tell him." But fear growled louder, or maybe he'll never forgive the lie. Still, sparks lit strong enough to ignore shadows. One evening, Clara slipped on a wet street outside the shop after closing. Packages tumbled from her arms. Ethan, passing nearby, caught her before she hit the ground. They froze, his hands steady on her arms, her breath catching. For 5 full seconds the city disappeared. "You've got to learn balance," he muttered finally, voice low. "Maybe I need someone to teach me," she returned softly. The words sounded like invitation. They echoed between them long even after he let go. The bond grew through strange rituals. Clara brought Ethan sandwiches when he forgot meals. Ethan fixed her leaky faucet in the flower shop room without complaint. They argued over novels, Ethan mocking her affection for romantic classics, Clara insisting they carried truths. One night, after heated debates over an author's cynicism, Ethan finally smirked and said, "Maybe you believe in fairy tales too much." "Maybe you don't believe in them enough," she replied. Again, the silence after. Again, the storm of almost. But behind his guarded warmth, Ethan fought internal battles. He had been burned before, girls who liked his strength for a season but slipped away when reality bit too harsh. He carried scars invisible to Clara. "You're not like most," he admitted one night, frustration threading his tone. "But something doesn't add up. People don't just appear out of nowhere working in dusty stores." "What's your story, Clara?" Her throat tightened. "Maybe I'm just trying to find myself." "People like you don't need to find themselves," he muttered. She dared. "And what kind of person am I?" He studied her for a long moment, eyes filled with both yearning and fear. Then he looked away. "I can't tell yet. That's the problem." The words slashed deeper than she expected. She longed to shout, "I am more than a surname, more than marble." Instead she smiled faintly, masking panic, and whispered, "Then keep watching." The first brush of something undeniable came after weeks of shared tension. They left the store late, walking together by the pier. Wind whipped hair across Clara's face. Ethan reached, hesitated, then tucked the strand behind her ear. His fingers ghosted across her cheek. She froze under the touch, every nerve catching fire. Their eyes held. Rain threatened in clouds above. But before either leaned in, Ethan stepped back. "Not yet," he murmured roughly. Her chest ached at both relief and devastation. "Why not?" He exhaled. "Because some things break too easily. And I don't gamble on fragile." Clara lay awake that night aching. If only he knew. Her fragility was exactly what she was trying to break free from. As sparks blazed and struggles deepened, Clara sensed the storm circling closer. Ethan wanted honesty. Her disguise, once thrilling, began to feel cruel. Yet revealing her truth too soon might shatter everything. Her test of love had passed first stages. He wasn't charmed by glamour, wasn't swayed by wealth. But could their bond survive when he learned she had hidden her entire life from him? And still, in moments between shelves and sidewalks, her heart whispered what her head feared. Yes, this is real. But real comes with demands, and soon their bond would face its sharpest one. Secrets are easier to maintain when distance exists. But the closer Clara and Ethan drifted, the harder it became to hide the cracks in her disguise. Every touch, every look, every question sharpened the weight of what she'd buried. Her double life dangled like glass over stone. One wrong move, one wrong name, and everything would shatter. It began with a dinner invitation. Marco had closed the shop early on Friday, surprising both Clara and Ethan by suggesting they grab food from a street vendor nearby. Ethan resisted at first, muttering about long shifts, but eventually joined. They ate grilled skewers under neon lights while strangers laughed around them. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, content with silence, but Clara moved with ease among vendors and chatter. She looked almost too comfortable, almost too polished in her posture despite denim and sneakers. A woman at the vendor cart squinted. "Haven't I seen you somewhere? A magazine maybe?" Clara's throat tightened. She forced a laugh. "I doubt it. My face just blends." The woman shrugged and returned to her chili sauce, but Ethan's gaze lingered, sharp and mistrusting. Later, on the walk home, he said in a low growl, "You ever going to explain why strangers think they've seen you before?" Clara's heart thrashed. "Coincidence. Coincidence doesn't leave your mouth tasting like lies," he muttered. His words cut deep. Still, she couldn't pull the disguise down yet. The near misses kept multiplying. One Saturday afternoon, Clara left her room above the flower shop dressed for a family luncheon she couldn't refuse. A cream dress, pearls small but unmistakably expensive. In her rush, she almost collided with Ethan 2 blocks away as he lugged boxes from a delivery truck. His eyes widened at the sight of her clothes, stark contrast to her usual faded jeans. "Big day?" he asked, too casual. Clara fumbled. "Just meeting a friend. She likes to dress up." He studied her, gaze prowling from pearls to heels. He opened his mouth to press. Then, mercifully, his manager yelled for him to unload faster. Ethan cursed under his breath and moved on, but suspicion darkened his expression long after she disappeared. Clara's pulse took hours to settle. Later that week, another slip erupted. Gregory Darnell barged into the bookstore, broad smile plastered on his entitled face. Clara had begged him to leave her alone, but he had tracked her down somehow, a call to her father's secretary or perhaps tailing her discreetly. "Darling Clara," he announced in far too loud a voice, "you've been impossible to reach." The world froze as Ethan, standing near the counter, stiffened visibly at Gregory's familiarity. Clara's body went cold. She grabbed Gregory's arm, dragging him sharply to the alley outside. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Looking for you," Gregory replied smugly. "Your father warned me you had habits of hiding. Playing pauper suits some phase, but don't forget who you are. The Montrose legacy." "Say that name louder," Clara snapped, panic sharpening her tone. "Broadcast it if you really want to gut me." Gregory rolled his eyes. "Fine. I'd. But you can't keep pretending dirt is silk. He'll never love you once he learns what's under all this. He'll see you used him. Better you come back to where you belong before." She cut him off, voice low and trembling with rage. "Leave me alone, Gregory." He left with a mocking bow. But when Clara re-entered, Ethan's eyes drilled into her. "Who was that?" Clara stammered. "Nobody." "Didn't sound like nobody," he growled. What did he mean, pretending? She scrambled desperately. "You misheard. Ethan was drunk." But Ethan wasn't satisfied. His jaw clenched as though storing the question for later. Clara barely kept from collapsing into tears behind the counter. Her disguise was fraying faster than she could stitch it back. Her greatest fear wasn't even Gregory. It was Ethan himself, the way he noticed details others ignored. He wasn't dazzled by smiles. He wasn't blinded by charm. He watched patterns, hunted inconsistencies. And Clara overflowed with them. One night, she saw him scribbling in the notebook she'd once gifted him. Curiosity made her lean closer. There, in messy handwriting, he'd scrawled, "Clara, who are you really? Too polished for here. Too afraid of truth. Does she trust me at all?" Clara's throat ached reading words not meant for her. She slipped back before her shadow gave her away, guilt pressing heavy. His suspicion wasn't paranoia. It was truth slowly catching her. The tension built toward explosion the night Marco invited staff to a local bar for his birthday. Ethan and Clara both went, and for a few golden hours, the evening blurred in laughter. Clara surprised them all by winning a pool game with embarrassing luck. Ethan muttered she had angel devils on her side while she doubled over laughing. Their shoulders touched, and for once Ethan didn't pull away. But the fragile paradise cracked when news played on the bar's flickering TV. Clara Montrose, heiress to the Montrose shipping empire, was seen exiting a gala Tuesday evening. The screen flashed her in full gown, diamonds catching light. Clara froze, glass slipping dangerously in her hand. She prayed nobody looked. But Ethan did. His head whipped up to the screen, then to her face, then back again. His eyes widened before narrowing into fire. The others cheered at unrelated sports highlights, oblivious. But Ethan sat rigid, fury coiling under his skin. He said nothing that night. But when he walked her home afterward, silence heavier than rain pressed between them. At her door he stopped. "You going to tell me the truth?" he asked finally, voice low and rough. Clara trembled. "Someday." "Someday," he repeated bitterly, turning away. "Maybe, someday, is just another word for never." She reached for him, but he pulled free, striding into the night. Clara stood frozen at her doorway, tears burning. The discovery hadn't detonated fully yet. But the clock was ticking. Truth had always been inevitable. Now it loomed like thunder overhead, rattling both their hearts. Clara lay awake that night whispering broken prayers. "Please let me find the courage before his suspicion eats him alive. Before love curdles into hate." She had wanted to test who could love her for herself. But the test had twisted into betrayal waiting to happen. And Ethan? He was already on the edge of answering for himself. Some secrets unravel gently. Others rip open like lightning splitting a night sky. Clara's truth belonged to the latter. And when it finally fell, it didn't arrive as a clean confession. It detonated. It happened on an evening that had begun so gently Clara had dared to believe escape was still possible. Ethan had agreed, reluctantly, to walk with her after work to the pier. The autumn air bristled crisp against their faces, gulls shrieked across the darkening water, and street lamps hummed alive one by one. For once Ethan laughed, truly laughed, when Clara recited a clumsy limerick she'd read to a child earlier. She clutched the sound in her chest like treasure. The ache between them eased enough that hope crept back. "See," she teased. "You do know how to smile." His lips curved faint, reluctant. "Don't get used to it." But she wanted to. Oh, she wanted to. She considered, then almost dared to tell him. Her throat ached with the unsaid. If she could just admit everything here with the peer as witness, perhaps he would understand. Perhaps he would forgive the lies when he saw why she told them. But fate rarely offered clean chances. She was halfway through mustering courage when a sleek black car pulled to the curb at the end of the pier. The driver leapt out, doors swinging open with signature elegance. Worcester House crest gleamed on the side, a Montrose family insignia. Clara's stomach plummeted. Gregory Darnell stepped out first, immaculate in a tailored suit, annoyance carved sharp across his perfect jaw. "Clara," he barked, striding toward them. "There you are. Do you know the chaos you've caused, your parents vanishing like this, hiding with—" His gaze flicked to Ethan with a disdainful sneer. "Well, playing your little actress role with the help, apparently." Ethan stiffened. His eyes darted to Gregory, then to Clara, then to the family crest on the door. Clara stammered, stepping forward desperately. "Gregory, stop." But Gregory loved theatrics too much to stop. "Everyone at the gala saw your stunt the other week, slipping away. And now this charade? Pretending to scrub bookshelves when you're heiress to Montrose shipping? Honestly, Clara, this is beneath you." The world slowed. Ethan's face emptied. His shock carved deeper than any anger could. He looked at her, whispering, "Heiress?" Clara's chest collapsed. "Ethan, please, I can explain." "Explain?" His voice cracked. "You lied. All this time, you lied." People on the pier turned their heads curiously. Clara could feel their stares pressing. Her throat closed. "I didn't lie, I hid. I just wanted—" "What?" His hands trembled at his sides. "To play dress up? To see how long your little social experiment would last before you got bored of the poor fool who carried your boxes." Tears burned. "No. I wanted to know who would love me without the name, without the money. Don't you see? That was the only way." Ethan's laugh was brutal, hollow. "Don't twist this into some noble quest. You watched me bare myself to you, thinking you were one of us. Thinking you understood. While all along you had mansions in your back pocket." "I had nothing," she cried. "Do you know how suffocating it is, to be wanted only for money, for legacy? Nobody ever saw me." His voice thundered back, full of pain. "And what was I, Clara? Your pet project? Your lab rat to test sincerity? You don't see how cruel that is." She flinched as though slapped. "No, Ethan, you were never that. You should have told me," he whispered, shaking his head. His voice lowered, heavy with wounded truth. "You should have trusted me." Her tears spilled freely. "I was afraid. I was terrified that the moment I told you, it would destroy us." "It already did," he said. Gregory hovered, smirking at the destruction his words had wrought. "Well now," he said smugly, "perhaps she'll come to her senses. This farce has gone on long enough, Clara." Ethan turned his glare on Gregory. "Stay out of it." Gregory raised one brow mockingly. "Possessive, aren't we?" But Ethan didn't argue further. He merely looked at Clara again, eyes burning not with hatred but with betrayal too raw to hide. He shook his head once, slow. Then he walked away. Not quickly, not violently, but deliberately. Each step echoed like judgment. Clara's sob broke as she lurched forward. "Ethan, please." But he didn't stop. Her legs buckled. She sank to her knees on the pier as Gregory muttered, "Dramatic as always." He motioned to the driver. "Come along. They'll be waiting." She didn't move. She only pressed her palms into the wood, body shaking with sobs. The disguise was gone. The test was over. And in his eyes, she hadn't revealed her truest self. She had deceived him. The following days crawled like decades. Ethan stopped coming to the bookstore entirely. Marco noticed Clara's hollow eyes but assumed it was simply heartbreak of the usual variety, not the kind that split identities apart. Clara tried calling Ethan. He didn't answer. She wrote letters, left them at the pier. No response. Her reflection in the mirror taunted. Who was she now? The heiress in pearls watched and used? Or the girl in faded jeans who had laughed with Ethan by the pier? Neither identity felt whole anymore. Both were fractured. The worst was knowing Ethan's anger wasn't baseless. She had deceived him, even if her intentions were desperate and sincere. For all her pain, she had put him in a cruel game, and he hated games. Each night she whispered into her pillow, "I didn't mean to hurt you. But whispers cannot reach the heart already barricaded by betrayal. Ethan, meanwhile, drowned his turmoil in silence. He didn't tell coworkers why the bookstore delivery shifted schedules. He didn't tell his brother why he seemed brittle at night. But inside, fury and grief wrestled endlessly. He had allowed himself to trust Clara. Her clumsiness, her warmth, had cracked walls he vowed never to break. And now he felt like a fool, the poor boy played by a rich woman's game. He remembered every smile and wondered, was it real? Or staged? The trouble was, he knew it had been real. That truth made the betrayal sharper. Because if she could love him and still hide something so massive, how could he ever believe she wouldn't hide more? So he stayed away. Because silence at least hurt clean. Clara learned the hardest truth of her experiment. Love demanded risk. And in refusing to risk trust earlier, she had risked something far greater, losing him entirely. Now all she had left was regret. And Ethan had all he thought he needed, anger. Clara had lived her entire life cushioned by marble and chandeliers, and yet the floor of the bookstore, with its simple wooden boards and faint scent of glue from stacked paperbacks, felt more like home than her mansion ever had. That was why losing Ethan there cut sharper than any blade. He had been the one person who saw through her polished edges, only for her secret to turn the bond into ash. The week after his discovery, Clara existed in a fog. Customers' voices blurred. Marco's lectures felt like background noise. She stacked books until her hands cramped, desperate for distraction. At night, she traced Ethan's expression in her memory, the hollow shock, the fire of betrayal, and hated herself for letting fear make her crueler than her father ever managed. I wanted the truth of love, she whispered to the ceiling cracks. Instead I built a lie around it. Her parents tried to reclaim her after the fiasco. Gregory bragged to society papers about being her long-time intended, urging the Montrose name to swallow her disgrace. But Clara refused invitations. She avoided galas. For once she didn't care about polished appearances. I will not plaster pearls over my mistakes, she argued with her father during one heated visit. Maurice Montrose scoffed. You humiliated this family. Throwing yourself at delivery boys like some romantic tragedy. How long must you play beggar before you learn legacy is not yours to ruin? Clara's voice sharpened with steel. Legacy means nothing if the price is love. Her father sneered. Then you've already lost both. She left before tears could undo her mask. Yet his words took root. Perhaps she had lost both, the Montrose Empire and Ethan. But if one could not be reclaimed, perhaps the other still could. Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with himself in silence. At work, he pressed harder, lifting until his shoulders screamed, knocking out deliveries with mechanical precision. His coworkers teased him about being restless, about brooding harder than usual. His brother Matteo asked gently, "Is this about her?" And Ethan simply growled, "I don't want to talk about it." But he couldn't silence his heart. Every coffee shop smelled of her. Every page of a book reminded him of her quick laughter. Even the pier betrayed him. The waves whispered her name, gulls echoed her voice. He replayed her confession. I wanted to see who'd love me without the money. Don't you see? That was the only way. Was it cruelty? Or desperation? His pride screamed cruelty. His chest whispered desperation. And that whisper, as weeks passed, refused to go away. Clara decided words could no longer prove anything. Only actions could. When news struck that the community center across from the bookstore would close due to debt, Clara made her choice. Not as Montrose. Not as heiress. As Clara, the woman who loved Ethan, who believed in worth beyond wealth. She met with volunteers. She scrubbed walls. She hosted bake sales with children. Every day outside her shifts, she rolled up sleeves and painted walls and carried heavy boards. She never signed her real name on forms, never wrote the Montrose title anywhere. Her inheritance remained untouched. Her efforts were sweat, labor, kindness. Rumors spread through the neighborhood. The bookstore girl pouring her heart into saving the center. Some mocked the futility. Others joined. Ethan heard whispers too. Delivery runs past the center often, and one day he saw her through the glass, face smudged with paint, jeans streaked, handing a hammer to a child like it was a crown. He froze. This wasn't the heiress at galas. It wasn't deception. This was her. A girl who didn't run when labor pressed hard. A girl who looked alive with purpose. Pain twisted darker in him, but cracks of doubt appeared. Maybe she didn't mock him. Maybe she wanted to prove sincerity the only way she knew. He left quickly that day. But he couldn't unsee it. Clara pushed herself to exhaustion. At night she collapsed onto her squeaky bed, the scent of paint still in her hair, fingers raw from scrubbing. But for the first time since Ethan walked away, she felt alive with something sharper than regret. "I'll prove," she whispered fiercely to herself, "that I am not glass. That I am not just the Montrose name. Even if it costs me everything." And slowly, painfully she began to believe it. The proving ground tightened around Ethan when Marco, smug as always, remarked, "Your friend Clara's killing herself saving the center. Funny how she doesn't quit even when it's hopeless." "Hopeless?" Ethan asked sharply. Marco shrugged. "Money's short, volunteers are young. Center probably won't last. But she's in there every night like the world depends on it. Stubborn girl." Hopeless. Ethan carried the word like lead. Clara wasn't using money to prop herself up. She was using grit. The very thing he always demanded of others was what she was showing. So why did he still ache with anger? Because anger was easier than forgiveness. 2 weeks before the center's decision, Clara organized a street fundraiser. Children painted boards, teenagers sang songs, vendors donated food. Music rose into the city's dusk. Clara worked every booth, every corner, face flushed with sincerity. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, battling with himself. His pride demanded he leave. His heart demanded he stay. When Clara spotted him, her breath caught. She didn't run to him, she only nodded once, trembling, then returned to passing out flyers. Something in that restraint, her refusal to beg, her determination to keep building even under his eyes, shook Ethan to his core. He stayed until dusk bled into night, watching her laugh with children, collapse into chairs, then rise again. Watching her, not as heiress, not as deceiver, but as Clara. His pulse hammered with realization. She wasn't playing anymore. She was proving. At day's end, as Clara gathered supplies alone, she felt a shadow beside her. Turning, she saw him. Ethan. Her throat closed. He didn't speak at first. He only picked up a crate beside her, carried it silently. When it thudded onto the table, he whispered, "You're different than the story I told myself." Her eyes burned. "Ethan." "Not yet." His voice firm but softer than weeks before. "Keep showing me. Don't stop. If you really are who you say," he swallowed hard, "then maybe we still have a chance." Then he walked away again, leaving her trembling with both grief and hope. The proving ground had begun. The test wasn't hers alone anymore, it was his too. Clara would continue to build, to strip name and wealth from her labor. Ethan would decide whether trust could rebuild after betrayal. And between them, the question lingered like the moon. Could love survive the fire of deception if, in the aftermath, truth was forged stronger than lies? Only time and courage would tell. The night before the community center's verdict, Clara stood in the quiet, looking out the dusty front windows. Behind her, fresh murals dried on patched walls, painted by children whose laughter had filled the place only hours earlier. Flyers cluttered the tables, jars of coins awaited final counts. Her muscles ached, her hands blistered, but her heart pulsed with something she hadn't felt in weeks: resolve. For weeks she'd fought the battle not as Clara Montrose heiress, but simply Clara, the bookstore girl willing to stand sweat-soaked in the dust of ordinary life. And though the center's future remained uncertain, she had already discovered her own. She no longer wanted to hide behind glass palaces. She wanted the soil under her fingernails, the warmth of shared bread, the freedom of truth. But what she didn't know was whether Ethan would choose to believe any of it. That morning, the center's board announced the fundraiser had saved them for another year. Cheers erupted, children clapped, mothers wept, and Clara cried with them. But in the back, leaning against a crooked doorway, watching silently, stood Ethan. His face was unreadable, but his presence made her heart quake harder than any verdict could. When the crowd finally thinned, Ethan walked toward her. Clara wanted to run, to embrace him, to explain everything all at once. But she stayed rooted, remembering his words, "Keep showing me." So instead she lifted her chin, dirt streaking her cheek, and waited. "You've worked harder than anyone," Ethan said eventually, his tone rough, restrained. Clara swallowed. "Not harder than you've worked your whole life." But it was the first time I felt worthy. Worthy of what? He asked. Her throat ached. Of you. The silence between them burned. Clara, Ethan began, his voice heavy, when Gregory exploded your truth that night, I thought you'd made me a joke. A game. I hated you for it. She closed her eyes, unable to stop tears. But then I watched you here. His eyes flicked around the painted walls. I watched you paint, scrape, scrub, beg on street corners. And I asked myself, why would a woman with marble floors and private cars do this? Why would she shovel alongside children until her hands blistered if it were all still a game? Clara whispered, because I wanted you to believe me. Ethan stepped closer. Then tell me the truth. The whole truth. Not bookstore Clara. Not hiding Clara. Who are you? For the first time she didn't flinch. She didn't mask or apologize. I am Clara Montrose. Heiress to a fortune I never wanted. Daughter of parents who measure life by ledgers. Woman who pretended to be poor because she was so desperate to know love that wasn't for sale. Her tears spilled unchecked now, but her voice steadied. And I am Clara who loves you. The woman who has been clumsy, messy, selfish, but who would choose your world of scraped knuckles over silken cages forever if you still let me. The truth lay raw on the floor between them, finally unhidden. Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked away for a long moment as though testing every line she'd spoken. Then he said, low but clear, do you know how badly you broke me? Yes, Clara whispered. And I will spend the rest of my life proving I can mend it. His eyes met hers, stormy but steady. Money doesn't impress me. Palaces mean nothing. But honesty is the only thing I've ever asked for. You didn't give me that at first. I know, she replied shakily. But I'm giving it to you now. All of it. No more disguises. Just me. He studied her long. She thought she saw his walls splinter, yet fear held her frozen. Finally, he exhaled sharply, like a man setting down a burden he'd carried too long. I don't want the heiress. I don't want the experiment. I want you. Her heart stopped. He stepped closer, reached up, and brushed paint flecks from her cheek. And if this, he said, gesturing to the dusty room, is who you are willing to be, then I'd be a fool to keep walking away. Clara's sob broke free just before his lips met hers. The kiss wasn't polished, wasn't poised, it was raw, desperate, filled with weeks of withheld longing. His arms wrapped her waist tightly, her hands tangled in his shirt, grounding them both as though the world had been shaking beneath their feet until now. When at last they pulled apart, breathless, Clara laughed through tears. So you do believe me? He smirked faintly. Let's just say I believe the sweat on your hands more than any surname. Clara pressed her forehead to his. Then let truth be the only thing between us from now on. Truth, Ethan agreed, voice rough but sure. Word of her double life swirled in tabloids for weeks. Whispers mocked an heiress who played pauper. Society ridiculed her choices. Gregory attempted to claim she'd humiliated herself permanently. But Clara didn't care anymore. She walked through the city streets with Ethan at her side, hand clasped in his, jeans speckled with dust. People stared. She smiled anyway. Because for the first time she wasn't walking as heiress or as disguise. She was walking as truth. Her father erupted in fury when she confronted him next. You are throwing away everything. Maurice Montrose thundered. No, father, Clara said quietly but firmly. I am finally keeping something. Love that isn't bought. Freedom that isn't forced. You cannot live without money, he roared. Yes, I can. Clara's voice didn't even shake. Because he loves me for myself. And I'd rather be poor in truth than rich in lies. Her father stared, stunned at the steel in her. For once he had no reply. As seasons changed, Clara and Ethan built their simple life together. Nights of shared meals, mornings of bookstore shifts, weekends volunteering at the center. It wasn't marble. It wasn't lavish. But it was theirs. And when Ethan finally opened the notebook she'd given him months before, he scribbled a single line across the first page. She is not the heiress. She is not the disguise. She is mine. And I am hers. Clara often smiled at the irony. She had disguised herself to test if someone would love the girl beneath silk. She had been exposed, humiliated, abandoned, and yet, forged through trial, proven by action, that love had been found anyway. Not because she was Montrose. Not because she wasn't. but because Ethan learned to see her, finally, for who she truly was. And that was worth more than all the chandeliers in the world.